How we doing? Good? All right, so this piece is dedicated to all the people that want to ignite social change. You having a good time? If you're having a good time, clap once, clap twice, clap 3 times. Don't be an activist, because you'll just be angry. Angry because you learn that everything evil in this world is rooted in this white supremacist, anti-black, anti-indigenous, heterosexist, capitalistic system. Paulo Freire called it when they made the Matrix. Once you become conscious, then you can never go back. With liberation comes work. With liberation takes work. With liberation comes burden. And that burden sits heavy like asthma. Ignorance must be really bliss because it's exhausting. Looking through Facebook news feeds without saying, God damn it, that stuff is messed up. Without seeing white people throw peace signs and making squinty eyes with hashtag Asian pose. Without having another conversation with your well-intentioned but racist friend who commented on your scholarly posts on microaggressions in the classroom. Without having another fraternity throw another Cinco de Drinko cross-the-border party. Without another newscaster blame the victim and defend the rapist. Without another black body being shot by another gunman named officer and feeling like you could never do anything. Ironically enough, you brush it off so you can procrastinate your AP sociology paper on institutional racism in the California prison system. It will hurt. It will hurt because it will come from your own people. They tell you too cocky, that you an opportunist that left home, South Sacramento for a job at university, and that you a sellout. And so you buy into their thinking. And they said you never really down, so you tell yourself that you're not really down. And they call you out for saying something problematic, and so you think yourself as a problem. You didn't collect enough petition signatures. You didn't stay long enough at the town hall meetings. You weren't there for your community when they needed you most. And so you question everything that you are, everything that you stand for. You hit this point of confusion of what it all means. You succumb to self-doubt and burnout. You get tired of being tired. And you tell yourself, I just want to be normal, just like everyone else. This heavy anxiety sitting on your shoulders makes you want to scratch your skin off, and you realize that normal is that bison effect, that MCN chokeholds that stops you from raising your voice, forces you to turn your head away from injustice just to face down iPhone screens. Normal is making it easier for you to keep up with BET, TMZ, MTV than the sake of humanity. Normal is respectability politics, obedience. Normal is making it easier for you to be cynical than critical. And you confuse normal for the substance that cynicism made ugly. Validation, acceptance, love. And you finally realize that it was never about you, and it was never about them. It was about everybody. It was about humanness, Ubuntu, in Lakesh. I am because you are because I am. It's a justice that institutions are incapable of achieving, love. And so you're forced to dream. You check your privilege for at-risk paychecks to implement your change, be the monkey wrench in the machine. Activism is not a sprint. It is a lifelong marathon. And the most crucial asset in your run is not the power in your legs, but the strength of your heart. So you must protect it. You must pace yourself to give it resilience. You will be your biggest critic, but the minute you look too far into your own steps, you will lose vision. So you must keep your head upright. Never lose sight of your finish line. This world does not need normal. It needs a relentless, unafraid pursuit of compassion. Every action or inaction disrupts or perpetuates the powers of colonialization. But you choose to upset the setup, disrupt the cover-up, stand against from standardization, turn up against oppression. You are meant to be different. You are greater than normal. You are more than an activist. You are deeply and truly necessary. Thank you. All right. Cool. How we doing? How's everyone doing? You having a good time? Say word. You having a good time? Say what's up? You having a good time? Say yes. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. Activism, it can be fun, okay? So I wanted to ask, what is activism? So activism is defined as an action or policy using vigorous campaigning to bring social change or political change. Now, when most folks think about activism, they think about the rigorous part, right? It's either protests, picket signs, people shouting. Even when you Google activism, right, you see the same elements: fists, strong opposition, conflict, occupying space. This narrow view of social justice doesn't allow us to think about how social change can be greatly embedded in our everyday matters and our everyday choices. Now, the principles of social justice for me and the active disruptions of systems of oppression ground why I live and do the things that I do. You don't have to protest to be an activist. Rather, activism is a lifestyle of conscious choices that fight systems of oppression, right? Just like anything, Just like anything, activism falls along the spectrum. This is called the action continuum. Every action or inaction as students, staff, teachers, entrepreneurs, artists, CEOs coincide along this plane. Now, if we understand that we live in a society where systems of oppression are constantly at work, issues like race-based incarceration, strategic gentrification, inequitable employment policies, then we have to realize our actions, choices, big or small, disrupts or perpetuates those oppressions. On the far left, we see that actions support and continue on systems of oppression, while on the far right, we see actions that challenge and disrupt oppression. Now, before we undo oppression, we have to first just acknowledge that it exists. And then when we know that it exists, we have to educate ourselves, know more, then eventually teach others. And then eventually, we get to this point where we support change as well as implement the change ourselves. Oftentimes, we think that it's protests or it's sit-ins, but activism has many different forms. Okay? So activism is a conscious choice of how, where, who, and where we buy food. Buying local groceries creates sustainable models for organically grown foods. It supports community farmers. It cuts back on transportation costs and CO2 emissions. And it doesn't fuel into like the main corporate chains, right? But we also need to recognize that not everybody can buy local, that it's expensive and unaffordable for a lot of communities, that some people live in low-income neighborhoods called food deserts, right? And we have to recognize these inequalities if we want to give access to everybody. Social justice is the use of our language. It's both the words that we consciously use, but also, just as importantly, the words that we don't use. Language matters. It has an enormous power. It has an influence on the people that we use it for, as well as is it a reflection of our conscious and unconscious, using certain problematic terms and derogatory terms like illegals or aliens, terrorists, retarded, ghetto, is a reflection of our implicit and explicit bias. Now, this is not just a matter of political correctness, but it's a matter of respect. If it's not about shaming people in their ignorance, rather it's changing and challenging the social norms that upkeep this language that come from a historical root of marginalizing and suppressing marginalized communities. Equity is also challenging and minimizing microaggressions. Columbia professor Daryl Sue refers to microaggressions as brief, commonplace, daily behavioral and environmental indignities. Whether intentional or not intentional, these communications are hostile, derogatory, negative towards marginalized peoples. Now, you may say that these folks are just being really sensitive, right? But for me, when you live in a body where you're socially likely to face microaggressions on an everyday basis, you're not being sensitive. It's just a simple nature of being slighted every single day, consistently and constantly. We shouldn't ask these people to just get used to it, but we should be activists and help shape the inclusive language and holistic behaviors that welcome and affirm our communities. Activism is not choosing just to be a bystander. And when we see sexual violence, that we choose to be involved. We choose to fight against rape culture. UCDavis started an Upstandard project where it challenges rape culture, as well as challenge double standards against women and non-gender-forming folks. And we shouldn't just settle as it is what it is, but also activism attempts to challenge those gender norms. Feminism isn't just creating empowering spaces for women and gender nonconforming, but it's also challenging the hypermasculine behaviors of men that perpetuate sexism, homophobia, and patriarchy. Now, I often tell my students that, sometimes activism doesn't have to be you getting involved with your community, doing advocacy, and being part of student organizations, but sometimes it's just being a person of color and getting a college degree. That within itself is a political statement. Once you understand that activism is embedded in everything that you do, it can feel overwhelming a little bit, right? In social justice, no one is perfect, and perfection is not the goal. It's not ideal. It's not realistic. Social justice allows us to recognize that we are a constant work in progress, and therefore, we have to be humble. Humble means that you make mistakes. You're willing to accept those mistakes. You're willing to apologize. You're willing to learn and grow from those errors. And in that process of just as much of self-correction, you have to self-care. You have to self-love. Self-love, self-care does not look like choosing to do everything. Saying yes to every community issue, every political movement is not sustainable nor productive. Once again, activism is not a sprint. It is a lifelong marathon. Getting to a level where you work yourself into the ground makes you incapable and, more importantly, ineffective. You cannot love other people in your community if you don't love yourself first. Proper forms of self-care is setting yourself up for success, sustainability. It's not resting when you have to and you literally can't keep your eyes open anymore, but it's resting because it's structured as a part of your practice, that you need it, that you understand its necessity to keep you whole and full. It's reflecting and knowing yourself. It's creating structures of support and understanding that you both need physical health and mental health. It's doing things that fulfill us, restore us, reset us back to center, not simply pass the time and removing us from thinking like TV and social media sometimes could be really toxic self-care because it just allows us to stress more or avoid systemic issues. It's loving ourselves, right? Feeling ourselves, allowing us to be within all of our intersectional identities, and at the same time, not suppressing other people's in that process. When terms like queer or the slants, fat, are reclaimed or marginalized communities, that's self-love. It's not for other communities that don't identify to challenge or take up or appropriate in the midst of that celebration. Caribbean American writer, feminist, and civil rights activist Audre Lorde says, caring for myself is not a self-indulgence, it's a self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Now, spaces for artistic expression have always been vital to be a vehicle for self-love and activism. Open mics are an important pedestal for marginalized communities to express, to reclaim, and become whole. We know that art is a form of resistance to the imperfection of reality, as well as an attempt to recreate an alternative one. I write poetry to not just entertain and educate, but to love myself and to love others. It validates and affirms my narrative as well as acknowledge the oppressions of other people. That is my activism. My journey in social justice is endless and constantly evolving. I question myself every single day about how do I create more equity in this world through the choices I make. And if there's anything I can invoke, with you all in this room, it's simply to ask one thing: what is your activism? Thank you.